In the corner of a small room in Guangxi, China, there is a coffin. It belongs to the woman who lives there. She had it made years ago, keeps it close, and is not troubled by it in the slightest. Her name is Lumu Shen. At the time researchers found her, she was 126 years old. She had outlived her husband, outlived all 5 of her own children, and was still eating breakfast every morning without assistance. Rice, local greens, vegetables cooked in hemp oil. The same meal she had been eating since she was a young woman. When they asked her grandson what the secret was, he didn't have a clean answer. She just lived, he said. She just kept living. Bama County sits in the Guangxi Mountains of southern China. In a local population of under 250,000, researchers have documented more than 70 centenarians and over 200 people in their 90s. That is nearly 7 times the national average, not a cluster, a pattern. And the people who came to study it, geneticists, nutritional researchers, epidemiologists, left with something they had not expected to find. There was no exotic gene. There was no rare herb. There was a daily practice, several of them, done in the same order, every single day, for an entire lifetime. There is one thing the oldest residents of Bama consume every morning before they eat, before they work, before anything else begins. Not a supplement, not a tea. Something so ordinary the earliest researchers recorded it as background detail and moved on. It took years before anyone looked at it closely enough to understand what it was doing inside the body. We are going to get to that. But it only makes sense once you understand what these people were quietly fighting and winning every single day. Bama County is not easy to find on a map. It sits buried inside a landscape of limestone karst mountains and narrow river valleys that look, as one journalist described it, like they were lifted straight from an ancient Chinese painting. For most of the 20th century, the central government largely ignored it. No major infrastructure, no industrial development, no significant outside influence. The isolation that kept Bama poor for generations may be the same isolation that kept its people alive. The population is predominantly Yao ethnic minority, a group with deep roots in this specific geography, eating the same foods, drinking the same water, living by the same rhythms their grandparents lived by. The numbers that eventually drew researchers here are difficult to dismiss. More than 70 documented centenarians in a population of under 250,000, one of the highest per capita concentrations of extreme old age anywhere on Earth. Huang Buqing, at 118 years old, was still receiving visitors in Changshao village when researchers arrived. Wang Shuping, documented at 113, had lived through the nationalist conflicts, the Japanese occupation, and decades of communist rule. These were not people who had been protected from hardship. They had lived through some of the most turbulent periods in modern Chinese history and come out the other side with clean blood work and functioning bodies. China's national life expectancy sits at 74 years. The gap between that number and what Bama produces is not a rounding error. It is a decades-long divergence that points directly at something environmental, something dietary, something behavioral. Researchers who arrived expecting a genetic answer left asking a different question entirely. What are these people doing every single day that the rest of China is not? Before we get to what Bama's centenarians eat and drink, you need to understand what they are fighting, because the foods and practices only make sense once you understand the 3 biological processes that are quietly accelerating aging in most people over 60. These are not abstract concepts. They are measurable, documented, and in the West, we manage all 3 almost exclusively with medication. The first is chronic inflammation. Not the acute inflammation that heals a wound, but the low-grade systemic kind that runs silently in the background for years. C-reactive protein is the blood marker researchers use to measure it. In populations eating a standard Western diet, CRP levels rise steadily with age. In Bama's elderly, they don't. Chronic inflammation is the root driver of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and most cancers. It is not a symptom of aging. In most cases, it is a cause of it. The second is oxidative stress. Think of it as cellular rust. Every decade after 50, free radical damage accumulates faster than the body can repair it. Mitochondria weaken. DNA repair slows. Tissues age at the cellular level in ways that eventually surface as the visible and invisible markers of decline. Bama's centenarians show antioxidant enzyme activity that researchers did not expect to find in people of their age. Their cells are defending themselves more effectively than the cells of people decades younger in comparison populations. The third is mineral depletion. This is the one that rarely makes the list in Western longevity research, and that omission is a significant error. As the body ages, the enzymatic processes that govern cellular repair, nerve function, cardiovascular regulation, and metabolic efficiency all depend on an adequate supply of specific minerals, particularly magnesium, calcium, and trace elements. Most Western adults are chronically deficient in magnesium alone. That deficiency doesn't announce itself dramatically. It accumulates quietly, high-slowing the machinery of the body at a level most standard blood panels don't even measure. Bama's centenarians showed dramatically lower markers across all three of these processes. Not because of medication, not because of supplements, because of what they consume every single day. And the first thing they consume, the one the researchers almost walked past, is where this system begins. Here is where the story gets specific. Every morning, before food, before work, before anything else, the oldest residents of Bama drink water. Not a supplement, not a tea, not an extract. Water, but not the water most of the world drinks. Bama's spring water filters through limestone karst mountains for decades before it surfaces. That process is not incidental. It is the mechanism. As the water moves slowly through the rock, it absorbs calcium, a magnesium, and a profile of trace minerals that surface water, tap water, and most bottled water simply do not contain. The sodium content is low. The mineral content is high. The water is slightly alkaline and carries a measurable negative ionic charge that researchers have documented in Bama's primary water sources. Magnesium alone is involved in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the human body. It governs muscle and nerve function, regulates blood glucose, supports protein synthesis, and is directly involved in DNA repair. The World Health Organization has published findings indicating that magnesium-rich drinking water is associated with reduced cardiovascular mortality. Most Western adults consume well below the recommended daily intake of magnesium through food. They drink water that contains almost none. Now think about what you drank this morning. Coffee, most likely. Maybe filtered tap water. Now think about what that water contained beyond hydration. In most cases, the answer is almost nothing. We have engineered the mineral content out of our water supply and replaced it with volume. We drink enough. We absorb almost none of what the body needs at the cellular level to run its repair processes. Lumu Shen drank from the same limestone springs her grandparents drank from every day of her life. She didn't think of it as medicine. It was simply water, and that water, consumed every morning before anything else, was quietly doing work that no supplement on a shelf has yet replicated in the same form. The practical step is straightforward. Check the mineral content label on your water. We'll look specifically for magnesium above 50 milligrams per liter. Most standard bottled waters fall well below that. Gerolsteiner and Vichy Catalan come meaningfully closer. Drink 2 glasses before breakfast, before coffee, before food. That is where the Bama morning begins. And that is the thing the researchers almost missed entirely. But the water alone does not explain everything. What Bama's centenarians eat alongside it is equally specific and equally misunderstood. The water explains the mineral profile. It does not explain everything. What Bama's centenarians eat alongside it completes the picture, and the food system is as deliberate as the water, even if it looks, on the surface, like simple peasant cooking. The core diet is built on three things: local vegetables, corn paste, and hemp seed oil. Not hemp extract, not a capsule, it's not a supplement. The cold-pressed oil from hemp seeds, used as the primary cooking fat in Bama households for generations. This is the detail that stopped nutritional researchers when they began analyzing what these centenarians were actually consuming. Hemp seed oil contains omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in a ratio of approximately 1:3. That ratio matters more than the individual numbers. The human body evolved, requiring these two fatty acids in a balanced proportion. The modern Western diet delivers them in a ratio closer to 1:15, or in some estimates 1:20, heavily skewed toward omega-6. That imbalance is one of the most well-documented dietary drivers of systemic inflammation. Bama's centenarians were never in that imbalance, not because they understood the biochemistry, because hemp was what grew there. Now think about what oil you cooked with this week: vegetable oil, canola, sunflower, corn oil, all of them heavily omega-6 dominant, all introduced into Western kitchens as modern, heart-healthy alternatives to animal fats. The chronic inflammation data tells a different story. The cooking oil, sitting in most Western kitchens, is one of the quietest drivers of the inflammatory cascade that builds cardiovascular disease and cognitive decline over decades. The grain staple in Bama is a local variety of corn, prepared as a simple paste or porridge. Unrefined, unprocessed, lower glycemic load than white rice, and containing antioxidant compounds that refined corn products strip out entirely. Paired with local greens and hemp oil, the meal delivers slow-release energy, anti-inflammatory fat, and micronutrient density without triggering the glucose spike that follows a standard Western breakfast. Lu Shen's diet was described by those who knew her as unchanged across her entire life. Rice, greens, vegetables in hemp oil. The scarcity that shaped her eating inadvertently produced exactly what longevity researchers would later identify as optimal. She wasn't following a protocol. She was eating what was available, and what was available happened to be exactly right. The third factor, though, was something she wasn't eating or drinking at all. The water and the food explain a significant part of what researchers found in Bama. But there is a third factor that the earliest investigators recorded and then largely set aside because it didn't fit neatly into a nutritional framework. It wasn't something the centenarians were consuming. It was something they were breathing. Bama's limestone karst geography and the Panyang River Valley create an environment with one of the highest measured concentrations of negative ions in any inhabited location on Earth. Negative ions are molecules that carry an extra electron. They are produced naturally by moving water, by certain geological formations, and by the specific combination of mountain terrain and fast-moving river systems that define Bama's landscape. In the valley, the concentration reaches levels that are orders of magnitude above what most urban environments produce. The research on negative ions is not fringe science. Studies published in peer-reviewed journals have documented that high negative ion environments are associated with reduced oxidative stress markers, improved serotonin metabolism, and measurably better oxygen absorption at the cellular level. These are the same three biological processes identified earlier. The air in Bama was addressing them in parallel with the water and the food, every single day, without anyone in the valley thinking of it as treatment. This is why the health tourists came. Yao Shu had suffered a heart attack and a stroke. He traveled hundreds of kilometers from a Chinese city to spend time in Bama's river valleys. He reported being able to sing again, to speak again, after years of impaired function. His case is not isolated. The phenomenon of urban Chinese traveling to Bama specifically for cardiovascular and respiratory recovery became significant enough that the local government began building infrastructure around it. But here is the tension the researchers noted. and the local officials quietly acknowledged. The tourists arriving to absorb Bama's environment are bringing with them exactly the conditions that environment lacks: traffic, construction, industrial activity, chronic stress. The hotels going up in the valley are beginning to alter the air quality that made the valley worth visiting. The centenarians who built their longevity on a stress-free, low-stimulus life are now receiving up to 200 visitors a day. The environment that produced the longest lives in China was built on stillness, and stillness, once disturbed, does not easily return. Put the three pillars together, and a specific daily sequence emerges. Not a wellness routine, not a biohacking protocol, just the way life moved in Bama for generations. But the sequence matters as much as the individual elements. And this is the part that most summaries of Bama's longevity leave out entirely. The oldest residents of Bama wake before sunrise. The first thing they consume is water. 2 full glasses of mineral-rich spring water before any food, before any activity, before the day has any demands on the body. Drinking mineral water on an empty stomach maximizes absorption. There is no food competing for the same digestive resources. The magnesium and calcium enter the system cleanly, and the enzymatic processes that depend on them begin the day already supplied. After the water comes movement, not exercise as a structured concept, but physical activity as a default condition of life. Field work, walking, tending to crops or animals. The centenarians of Bama did not go to the gym, for they went to their fields. The distinction matters because the movement was low intensity, sustained, and embedded in a purposeful daily routine, rather than performed as a separate health obligation. Research on low-intensity sustained movement consistently shows superior long-term metabolic benefits compared to high-intensity exercise performed occasionally. The first meal follows the movement: corn paste or rice with local greens cooked in hemp oil. No refined sugar, no processed carbohydrate, no industrial seed oil. The low glycemic grain keeps glucose flat. The hemp oil delivers the anti-inflammatory fat ratio. The greens provide micronutrient density. The sequence of water first, movement second, low glycemic meal third is not arbitrary. It is a biological setup that primes insulin sensitivity before the first carbohydrate of the day arrives. Here is what this looks like in a modern morning. Before coffee, drink 2 glasses of mineral water with magnesium above 50 milligrams per liter. Add a tablespoon of hemp seed oil to your first meal. Walk for 10 minutes before or after breakfast, not as a workout, as a signal to the body. Eat a low glycemic first meal. Corn porridge, sweet potato, whole grain with a fat source. Total time under 15 minutes, not a lifestyle overhaul, a direction. The sequence is the practice. Each step makes the next one work harder. The researchers who traveled to Bama expecting to find something exotic came back with findings that were, in a certain light, almost disappointing. There was no rare herb. There was no ancient formula. There was no genetic variant exclusive to the Yao people that explained the numbers. What they found was repetition. The same foods, the same water, the same movement, the same daily rhythm, practiced without variation across an entire lifetime. Lumu Shen ate the same meal for most of her 126 years. Rice, greens, vegetables, and hemp oil. Not because she was disciplined in the way we use that word today, because there was nothing else. Wang Shuping, documented at 113, followed the same pattern. Simple meals, the same water source, the same unhurried daily movement. These were not people optimizing their health. They were people living in an environment that had never offered them the option to do otherwise. This is the mechanism that Western longevity research consistently underweights. Habit consistency maintained across decades reduces 3 things that accelerate aging directly: decision fatigue, which elevates cortisol; metabolic variability, which destabilizes glucose and inflammatory markers; and the constant reintroduction of novel inputs that prevent any single beneficial practice from compounding over time. The Western approach runs in the opposite direction. We rotate diets every few months. We cycle through supplement regimens. We optimize, abandon, and restart. Each rotation resets the clock on whatever the previous practice was beginning to build. The compounding effect that made Lu Mushen's diet powerful was not the hemp oil in isolation. It was the hemp oil every day for a century. The supplement industry has understood the appeal of Bama's story and responded predictably. Hemp oil capsules, 2 mineral supplements, negative ion generators. All of them attempt to extract one element from a system that works because of its wholeness and its consistency. The Bama centenarians didn't take anything. They consumed real food, real water, and real air in the same pattern, without interruption, for their entire lives. That is not a product, it is a practice. And the difference between those two things is exactly the distance between where most people are and where the centenarians of Bama ended up. Lu Mushen kept a coffin in the corner of her room and was not troubled by it. She had made her peace with mortality, the way you make peace with something you have lived alongside long enough that it no longer frightens you. What she had not made peace with was stopping. She kept eating her rice and greens. She kept drinking her water. She kept moving, not because she was trying to live longer, because it was simply how a day began. 3 things: mineral-rich water before anything else, hemp seed oil, and low-glycemic food as the foundation of every meal, movement, simplicity, and a stress-free rhythm maintained without interruption across an entire lifetime. You have access to all 3. Mineral water is on a shelf. Hemp seed oil is in a health food store. A 10-minute morning walk costs nothing. Tomorrow morning, before coffee, before breakfast, drink 2 glasses of mineral water. That is where it starts. Subscribe, and every week we go deep on one of the world's longest-lived populations. One practice, one honest protocol. Which pillar are you starting with first? Let me know in the comments.